Hey guys, happy upcoming holidays. Boy, do we have something in store here for you. If you're striving to become a better day trader or a better swing trader, if you're trying to go to the next level in trading, look, this is, in our view, the best trading book of all times ever written, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. And so if you love to read, click the link below this video, schedule a 20-minute trading options coaching session, get all your questions answered, and get a complimentary copy of this book emailed to you immediately. Don't wait another day. Don't wait another minute. Get the information that's going to propel you to go to the next level in your trading career right now. For those of you that may not have time to sit down and read the entire book, this is going to be awesome. You guys are going to love this. In this particular video, you'll have the chance to check out the audiobook, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. And our goal over the next week or two is to post all the chapters of this book in the audio file. So if you're the kind of guy that likes to multitask, you like to get a lot of stuff done while you're driving, you like to fill your brains with some great quality information, guys, this is it right here. You're going to be able to review the audiobook. Just keep following some of the videos we're posting. We will post the entire book, all the chapters in the form of the audiobook here. So hey guys, if you're looking to learn more great information about trading, this is it. If there's one thing you're going to do this holiday to improve as a trader, make sure you take notes as you're reviewing this book, whether you're doing this for this audiobook format that we're posting on our channel, or whether you're getting a copy of a free ebook from us. Now, if you want to get the book immediately, you can go to your nearby Barnes & Noble store. Sometimes they don't have it in stock though. Okay, you can order it on Amazon. I think it's only like 10, 20 bucks. But if you want it right now, in the next few minutes, click the links below, schedule your coaching session, and we'll send you the book pretty much right away. Without any further ado, this is the copy of the book that you would be receiving. It basically looks like this, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. Guys, the book is absolutely awesome. You will love it. Take action and learn. I'll catch you guys in the next post.
Chapter 1. I went to work when I was just out of grammar school. I got a job as quotation board boy in a stock brokerage office. I was quick at figures. At school, I did 3 years of arithmetic in one. I was particularly good at mental arithmetic. As quotation board boy, I posted the numbers on the big board in the customer's room. One of the customers usually sat by the ticker and called out the prices. They couldn't come too fast for me. I've always remembered numbers. No trouble at all. There were plenty of other employees in that office. Of course, I made friends with the other fellows, but the work I did, if the market was active, kept me too busy from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. to let me do much talking. I don't care for it anyhow, during business hours. But a busy market did not keep me from thinking about the work. Those quotations did not represent prices of stocks to me, so many dollars per share. They were numbers. Of course they meant something. They were always changing. It was all I had to be interested in, the changes. Why did they change? I didn't know. I didn't care. I didn't think about that. I simply saw that they changed. That was all I had to think about, 5 hours every day and 2 on Saturdays. That they were always changing. That is how I first came to be interested in the behavior of prices. I had a very good memory for figures. I could remember in detail how the prices had acted on the previous day, just before they went up or down. My fondness for mental arithmetic came in very handy. I noticed that in advances as well as declines, stock prices were apt to show certain habits, so to speak. There was no end of parallel cases, and these made precedents to guide me. I was only 14, but after I had taken hundreds of observations in my mind, I found myself testing their accuracy, comparing the behavior of stocks today with other days. It was not long before I was anticipating movements in prices. My only guide, as I say, was their past performances. I carried the dope sheets in my mind. I looked for stock prices to run on form. I had clocked them. You know what I mean? You can spot, for instance, where the buying is only a trifle better than the selling. A battle goes on in the stock market, and the tape is your telescope. You can depend upon it 7 out of 10 cases. Another lesson I learned early is that there is nothing new in Wall Street. There can't be, because speculation is as old as the hills. Whatever happens in the stock market today has happened before and will happen again. I've never forgotten that. I suppose I really managed to remember when and how it happened. The fact that I remember that way is my way of capitalizing experience. I got so interested in my game and so anxious to anticipate advances and declines in all the active stocks that I got a little book. I put down my observations in it. It was not a record of imaginary transactions, such as so many people keep merely to make or lose millions of dollars without getting the swelled head or going to the poorhouse. It was rather a sort of record of my hits and misses. And next to the determination of probable movements, I was most interested in verifying whether I had observed accurately. In other words, whether I was right. Say that after studying every fluctuation of the day in an active stock, I would conclude that it was behaving as it always did before it broke 8 or 10 points. Well, I would jot down the stock and the price on Monday. And remembering past performances, I would write down what it ought to do on Tuesday and Wednesday. Later, I would check up with actual transcriptions from the tape. That is how I first came to take an interest in the message of the tape. The fluctuations were from the first associated in my mind with upward or downward movements. Of course, there is always a reason for fluctuations, but the tape does not concern itself with the why and wherefore. It doesn't go into explanations. I didn't ask the tape why when I was 14, and I don't ask it today at 40. The reason for what a certain stock does today may not be known for 2 or 3 days, or weeks, or months. But what the dickens does that matter? Your business with the tape is now, not tomorrow. The reason can wait. But you must act instantly, or be left. Time and again I see this happen. You'll remember that Hollow Tube went down 3 points the other day, while the rest of the market rallied sharply. That was the fact. On the following Monday, you saw that the directors passed the dividend. That was the reason. They knew what they were going to do, and even if they didn't sell the stock themselves, they at least didn't buy it. There was no inside buying. No reason why it should not break. Well, I kept up my little memorandum book, perhaps 6 months. Instead of leaving for home the moment I was through with my work, I'd jot down the figures I wanted, and would study the changes, always looking for the repetitions and parallelisms of behavior learning to read the tape, although I was not aware of it at the time. One day, one of the office boys, he was older than I, came to me where I was eating my lunch, and asked me on the quiet if I had any money. "Why do you want to know?" I said. "Well," he said, "I've got a dandy tip on Burlington. I'm going to play it if I can get somebody to go in with me." "How do you mean, play it?" I asked. To me, the only people who played or could play tips were the customers, old jiggers with oodles of dough. Why, it costs hundreds, even thousands of dollars to get into the game. It was like owning your private carriage and having a coachman who wore a silk hat. "That's what I mean, play it," he said. "How much you got?" "How much you need?" "Well, I can trade in 5 shares by putting up $5. "How are you going to play it?" "I'm going to buy all the Burlington the bucket shop will let me carry with the money I gave him for margin," he said. "It's going up for sure. It's like picking up money. We'll double ours in a jiffy." "Hold on," I said to him, and pulled out my little dope book. I wasn't interested in doubling my money, but in his saying that Burlington was going up. If it was, my notebook ought to show it. I looked. Sure enough, Burlington, according to my figuring, was acting as it usually did before it went up. I had never bought or sold anything in my life, and I never gambled with the other boys. But all I could see was that this was a grand chance to test the accuracy of my work, of my hobby. It struck me at once that if my dope didn't work in practice, there was nothing in the theory of it to interest anybody. So I gave him all I had, and with our pooled resources, he went to one of the nearby bucket shops and bought some Burlington. 2 days later, we cashed in. I made a profit of $3.12. After that first trade, I got to speculating on my own hook in the bucket shops. I go during my lunch hour and buy or sell. It never made any difference to me. I was playing a system, not a favorite stock or backing opinions. All I knew was the arithmetic of it. As a matter of fact, mine was the ideal way to operate in a bucket shop. where all that trader does is to bet on fluctuations as they're printed by the ticker on the tape. It was not long before I was taking much more money out of the bucket shops than I was pulling down from my job in the brokerage office. So I gave up my position. My folks objected, but they couldn't say much when they saw what I was making. I was only a kid, and office boy wages were not very high. I did mighty well on my own hook. I was 15 when I had my first 1,000, and laid the cash in front of my mother, all made in the bucket shops in a few months, besides what I had taken home. My mother carried on something awful. She wanted me to put it away in the savings bank out of reach of temptation. She said it was more money than she had ever heard any boy of 15 had made, starting with nothing. She didn't quite believe it was real money. She used to worry and fret about it, but I didn't think of anything, except that I could keep on proving my figuring was right. That's all the fun there is, being right by using your head. If I was right when I tested my convictions with 10 shares, I would be 10 times more right if I traded in 100 shares. That is all that having more margin meant to me. I was right more emphatically. More courage? No difference. If all I have is $10 and I risk it, I am much braver than when I risk $1 million if I have another $1 million salted away. Anyhow, at 15 I was making a good living out of the stock market. I began in the smaller bucket shops, where the man who traded in 20 shares at a clip was suspected of being John W. Gates in disguise, or J.P. Morgan traveling incognito. Bucket shops in those days seldom lay down on their customers. They didn't have to. There were other ways of parting customers from their money, even when they guessed right. The business was tremendously profitable. When it was conducted legitimately, I mean straight as far as the bucket shop went, the fluctuations took care of the shoestrings. It doesn't take much of a reaction to wipe out a margin of only 3/4 of a point. Also, no Welsher could ever get back in the game. Wouldn't have any trade. I didn't have a following. I kept my business to myself. It was a one-man business anyhow. It was my head, wasn't it? Prices either were going the way I doped them out, without any help from friends or partners, or they were going the other way, and nobody could stop them out of kindness to me. I couldn't see where I needed to tell my business to anybody else. I've got friends, of course, but my business has always been the same, a one-man affair. That's why I've always played a lone hand. As it was, it didn't take long for the bucket shops to get sore on me for beating them. I'd walk in and plank down my margin, but they'd look at it without making a move to grab it. They'd tell me there was nothing doing. That was the time they got to calling me the boy plunger. I had to be changing brokers all the time, going from one bucket shop to another. It got so that I had to give a fictitious name. I'd begin light, only 15 or 20 shares. At times, when they got suspicious, I'd lose on purpose at first, and then sting them proper. Of course, after a little while, they'd find me too expensive, and they'd tell me to take myself and my business elsewhere, and not interfere with the owner's dividends. Once, when the big concern I'd been trading with for months shut down on me, I made up my mind to take a little more of their money away from them. That bucket shop had branches all over the city, in hotel lobbies and in nearby towns. I went to one of the hotel branches and asked the manager a few questions, and finally got to trading. But as soon as I played an active stock my especial way, he began to get messages from the head office asking him who it was that was operating. The manager told me what they asked him, and I told him my name was Edward Robinson of Cambridge. He telephoned the glad news to the big chief, but the other end wanted to know what I looked like. When the manager told me that, I said to him, "Tell him I'm a short, fat man with dark hair and a bushy beard." But he described me instead, and then he listened, and his face got red, and he hung up and told me to beat it. "What did they say to you?" I asked him politely. "They said, 'You blankety-blank fool, didn't we tell you to take no business from Larry Livingston? And you deliberately let him trim us out of $700. He didn't say what else they told him. I tried the other branches one after another, but they all got to know me, and my money wasn't any good in any of their offices. I couldn't even go in to look at the quotations without some of the clerks making cracks at me. I tried to get them to let me trade at long intervals by dividing my visits among them all, but that didn't work. Finally, there was only one left to me, and that was the biggest and richest of all, the Cosmopolitan Stock Brokerage Company. The Cosmopolitan was rated as A1 and did an enormous business. It had branches in every manufacturing town in New England. They took my trading all right, and I bought and sold stocks and made and lost money for months. But in the end, it happened with them as usual. They didn't refuse my business point blank, as the small concerns had. Oh, not because it wasn't sportsmanship, but because they knew it would give them a black eye to publish the news that they wouldn't take a fellow's business just because that fellow happened to make a little money. But they did the next worst thing. That is, they made me put up a 3-point margin and compelled me to pay a premium, at first of a half a point, then a point, and finally a point and a half. Some handicap that. How? Easy. Suppose steel was selling at 90 and you bought it. Your ticket read normally, bought 10 steel at 90 and 1/8. If you put up a point margin, it meant that if you broke 89 and a quarter, you were wiped out automatically. In a bucket shop, the customer is not importuned for more margin, or put to the painful necessity of telling his broker to sell for anything he can get. But when the Cosmopolitan tacked on that premium, they were hitting below the belt. It meant that if the price was 90 when I bought, instead of making my ticket bought steel at 90 and 1/8, it read bought steel at 91 and 1/8. Why, that stock could advance a point and a quarter after I bought it, and I'd still be losing money if I closed the trade. And by also insisting that I put up a 3-point margin at the very start, they reduced my trading capacity by 2/3. Still, that was the only bucket shop that would take my business at all, and I had to accept their terms or quit trading. Of course, I had my ups and downs, but was a winner on balance. However, the Cosmopolitan people were not satisfied with the awful handicap they attacked on me, which should have been enough to beat anybody. They tried to double-cross me. They didn't get me. I escaped because of one of my hunches. The Cosmopolitan, as I said, was my last resort. It was the richest bucket shop in New England. And as a rule, they put no limit on a trade. I think I was the heaviest individual trader they had, that is, of the steady, everyday customers. They had a fine office and the largest and completest quotation board I have ever seen anywhere. It ran along the whole length of the big room, and every imaginable thing was quoted. I mean, stocks dealt in on the New York and Boston stock exchanges. Cotton, wheat, provisions, metals, everything that was bought and sold in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Liverpool. You know how they traded in bucket shops? You gave your money to a clerk and told him what you wished to buy or sell. He looked at the tape or the quotation board and took the price from there. The last one, of course. He also put down the time on the ticket, so that it almost read like a regular broker's report. That is, that they had bought or sold for you so many shares of such a stock at such a price, at such a time, on such a day, and how much money they received from you. When you wished to close your trade, you went to the clerk, the same or another, it depended on the shop, and you told him. He took the last price, and if the stock had not been active, he waited for the next quotation that came out on the tape. He wrote that price and the time on your ticket, okayed it, and gave it back to you. And then you went to the cashier and got whatever cash it called for. Of course, when the market went against you and the price went beyond the limit set by your margin, your trade automatically closed itself, and your ticket became one more scrap of paper. In the humbler bucket shops, where people were allowed to trade in as little as 5 shares, the tickets were little slips, different colors for buying and selling, and at times, as for instance in boiling bull markets, the shops would be hard hit, because all the customers were bulls and happened to be right. Then the bucket shop would deduct both buying and selling commissions, and if you bought a stock at 20, the ticket would read 20 and a quarter. You thus had only 3/4 of a point's run for your money. But the Cosmopolitan was the finest in New England. It had thousands of patrons, and I really think I was the only man they were afraid of. Neither the killing premium nor the 3-point margin they made me put up reduced my trading much. I kept on buying and selling as much as they'd let me. I sometimes had a line of 5,000 shares. Well, on the day the thing happened that I'm going to tell you, I was short 3,500 shares of sugar. I had 7 big pink tickets for 500 shares each. The Cosmopolitan used big slips with a blank space on them where they could write down additional margin. Of course, the bucket shops never asked for more margin. The thinner the shoestring, the better for them, for their profit lies in your being wiped. In the smaller shops, if you wanted to manage your trade still further, they'd make out a new ticket, so they could charge you the buying commission and only give you a run of 3/4 of a point on each point's decline, for they figured the selling commission also exactly as if it were a new trade. Well, this day, I remember I had up over $10,000 in margins. I was only 20 when I first accumulated $10,000 in cash, and you ought to have heard my mother. You'd have thought that $10,000 in cash was more than anybody carried around except old John D. And she used to tell me to be satisfied and go into some regular business. I had a hard time convincing her that I was not gambling, but making money by figuring. But all she could see was that $10,000 was a lot of money, and all I could see was more margin. I had put out my 3,509 shares of sugar at 105 and a quarter. There was another fellow in the room, Henry Williams, who was short 2,500 shares. I used to sit by the ticker and call out the quotations for the board boy. The price behaved as I thought it would. It promptly went down a couple of points and paused a little to get its breath before taking another dip. The general market was pretty soft, and everything looked promising. Then, all of a sudden, I didn't like the way sugar was doing its hesitating. I began to feel uncomfortable. I thought I ought to get out of the market. Then it sold for 103. That was the low for the day, but instead of feeling more confident, I felt more uncertain. I knew something was wrong somewhere, but I couldn't spot it exactly. But if something was coming and I didn't know where from, I couldn't be on my guard against it. That being the case, I'd better be out of the market. You know, I don't do things blindly. I don't like to. I never did. Even as a kid, I had to know why I should do certain things. But this time, I had no definite reason to give to myself, and yet I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't stand it. I called to a fellow I knew, Dave Wyman, and said to him, "Dave, you can take my place here. I want you to do something for me. Wait a little before you call out the next price of sugar, will you?" He said he would, and I got up and gave him my place by the ticker so we could call out the prices for the boy. I took my 7 sugar tickets out of my pocket and walked over to the counter, to where the clerk was who marked the tickets when you closed your trades. But I didn't really know why I should get out of the market, so I just stood there, leaning against the counter, my tickets in my hand so that the clerk couldn't see them. Pretty soon, I heard the clicking of a telegraph instrument, and I saw Tom Burnham, the clerk, turn his head quickly and listen. Then I felt that something crooked was hatching, and I decided not to wait any longer. Just then, Dave Wyman by the ticker began, "Shh," and quick as a flash, I slapped my tickets on the counter in front of the clerk and yelled, "Close sugar," before Dave had finished calling the price. So, of course, the house had to close my sugar at the last quotation. What Dave called turned out to be 103 again. According to my dope, sugar should have broken 103 by now. The engine wasn't hitting right. I had the feeling that there was a trap in the neighborhood. At all events, the telegraph instrument was now going like mad, and I noticed that Tom Burnham, the clerk, had left my tickets unmarked where I laid them, and was listening to the clicking as if he were waiting for something. So I yelled at him, "Hey, Tom, what the hell are you waiting for? Mark the price on these tickets 103. Get a gate on." Everybody in the room heard me and began to look toward us and ask what was the trouble. For, you see, while the Cosmopolitan had never laid down, there was no telling. And a run on a bucket shop can start like a run on a bank. If one customer gets suspicious, the others follow suit. So Tom looked sulky, but came over and marked my tickets closed at 103, and shoved the 7 of them over toward me. He sure had a sour face. Say, the distance from Tom's place to the cashier's cage wasn't over 8 feet. But I hadn't got to the cashier to get my money when Dave Wyman by the ticker yelled excitedly, "Gosh, sugar 108. But it was too late, so I just laughed and called over to Tom. It didn't work that time, did it, old boy? Of course, it was a put-up job. Henry Williams and I together were short 6,000 shares of sugar. That bucket shop had my margin and Henry's. And there may have been a lot of other sugar shorts in the office, possibly 8 or 10,000 shares in all. Suppose they had $20,000 in sugar margins. That was enough to pay the shop to thimble rig the market on the New York Stock Exchange and wipe us out. In the old days, whenever a bucket shop found itself loaded with too many bulls on a certain stock, it was a common practice to get some broker to wash down the price of that particular stock far enough to wipe out all the customers that were long of it. This seldom cost the bucket shop more than a couple of points on a few hundred shares, and they made thousands of dollars. That was what the Cosmopolitan did to get me and Henry Williams and the other sugar shorts. Their brokers in New York ran up the price to 108. Of course, it fell right back, but Henry and a lot of others were wiped out. Whenever there was an unexplained sharp drop, which was followed by instant recovery, the newspapers in those days used to call it a bucket shop drive. And the funniest thing was that not later than 10 days after the Cosmopolitan people tried to double-cross me, a New York operator did the amount of over $70,000. This man, who was quite a market factor in his day, and a member of the New York Stock Exchange, made a great name for himself as a bear during the Bryant Panic of '96. He was forever running up against stock exchange rules that kept him from carrying out some of his plans at the expense of his fellow members. One day, he figured that there would be no complaints from either the exchange or the police authorities if he took from the bucket shops of the land some of their ill-gotten gains. In the instance I speak of, he sent 35 men to act as customers. They went to the main office and to the bigger branches. On a certain day, at a fixed hour, the agents all bought as much of a certain stock as the managers would let them. They had instructions to sneak out at a certain profit. Of course, what he did was to distribute bull tips on that stock among his cronies, and then he went into the floor of the stock exchange and bid up the price, helped by the room traders, who thought he was a good sport, being careful to pick out the right stock for that work. There was no trouble in putting up the price 3 or 4 points. His agents at the bucket shops cashed in as prearranged. A fellow told me the originator cleaned up $70,000 net, and his agents made their expenses and then pay besides. He played that game several times all over the country, punishing the bigger bucket shops of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. One of his favorite stocks was Western Union, because it was so easy to move a semi-active stock like that a few points up and down. His agents bought it at a certain figure, sold at 2 points profit, went short, and took 3 points more. By the way, I read the other day that the man died poor and obscure. If he had died in 1896, he would have got at least a column on the first page of every New York paper. As it was, he got 2 lines on the... Chapter 2. Between the discovery that the Cosmopolitan Stock Brokerage Company was ready to beat me by foul means if the killing handicap of a 3-point margin and a 1.5-point premium didn't do it, and hints that they didn't want my business anyhow, I soon made up my mind to go to New York, where I could trade in the office of some member of the New York Stock Exchange. I didn't want any Boston branch, where the quotations had to be telegraphed. I wanted to be close to the original source. I came to New York at the age of 21, bringing with me all I had, $2,500. I told you I had $10,000 when I was 20, and my margin on that sugar deal was over $10,000. But I didn't always win. My plan of trading was sound enough, and won more often than it lost. If I had stuck to it, I'd have been right perhaps as often as 7 out of 10 times. In fact, I always made money when I was sure I was right before I began. What beat me was not having brains enough to stick to my own game. That is, to play the market only when I was satisfied that the precedents favored my play. There's a time for all things, but I didn't know it. And that is precisely what beats so many men in Wall Street, who are very far from being in the main sucker class. There is the plain fool, who does the wrong thing at all times, everywhere. But there's the Wall Street fool, who thinks he must trade all the time. No man can always have adequate reasons for buying or selling stocks daily, or sufficient knowledge to make his play an intelligent play. I proved it. Whenever I read the tape, by the light of experience, I made money. But when I made a plain fool play, I had to lose. I was no exception, was I? There was the huge quotation board staring me in the face, and the ticker going on, and people trading and watching their tickets turn into cash or into waste paper. Of course, I let the craving for excitement get the better of my judgment. In a bucket shop, where your margin is a shoestring, you don't play for long pulls. You're wiped too easily and quickly. The desire for constant action, irrespective of underlying conditions, is responsible for many losses in Wall Street, even among the professionals, who feel that they must take home some money every day, as though they were working for regular wages. I was only a kid, remember. I did not know then what I learned later. What made me, 15 years later, wait 2 long weeks and see a stock on which I was very bullish go up 30 points before I felt that it was safe to buy it. I was broke, and I was trying to get back, and I couldn't afford to play recklessly. I had to be right, and so I waited. That was in 1915. It's a long story. I'll tell it later in its proper place. Now let's go on from where, after years of practice at beating them, I let the bucket shops take away most of my winnings. And with my eyes wide open to boot. And it wasn't the only period of my life when I did it either. A stock operator has to fight a lot of expensive enemies within himself. Anyhow, I came to New York with $2,500. There were no bucket shops here that a fellow could trust. The stock exchange and the police between them had succeeded in closing them up pretty tight. Besides, I wanted to find a place where the only limit to my trading would be the size of my stake. I didn't have much of one, but I didn't expect it to stay little forever. The main thing at the start was to find a place where I wouldn't have to worry about getting a square deal. So, I went to a New York stock exchange house that had a branch at home where I knew some of the clerks. They have long since gone out of business. I wasn't there long, didn't like one of the partners. And then I went to A.R. Fullerton and Company. Somebody must have told them about my early experiences, because it was not long before they all got to calling me the boy trader. I've always looked young. It was a handicap in some ways, but it compelled me to fight for my own, because so many tried to take advantage of my youth. The chaps at the bucket shops, seeing what a kid I was, always thought I was a fool for luck, and that was the only reason why I beat them so often. Well, it wasn't 6 months before I was broke. I was a pretty active trader, and had a sort of reputation as a winner. I guess my commissions amounted to something. I ran up my account quite a little, but of course, in the end, I lost. I played carefully, but I had to lose. I'll tell you the reason. It was my remarkable success in the bucket shops. I could beat the game my way only in a bucket shop, where I was betting on fluctuations. My tape reading had to do with that exclusively. When I bought, the price was there on the quotation board, right in front of me. Even before I bought, I knew exactly the price I'd have to pay for my stock. And I always could sell on the instant. I could scalp successfully, because I could move like lightning. I could follow up my luck or cut my loss in a second. Sometimes, for instance, I was certain a stock would move at least a point. Well, I didn't have to hog it. I could put up a point margin and double my money in a jiffy. Or I'd take half a point on 100 or 200 shares a day. That wouldn't be bad at the end of the month, would it? The practical trouble with that arrangement, of course, was that even if the bucket shop had the resources to stand a big, steady loss, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't have a customer around the place who had the bad taste to win all the time. At all events, what was a perfect system for trading in bucket shops didn't work in Fullerton's office. There I was, actually buying and selling stocks. The price of sugar on the tape might be 105, and I could see a 3-point drop coming. As a matter of fact, at the very moment the ticker was printing 105 on the tape, the real price on the floor of the exchange might be 104 or 103. By the time my order to sell 1,000 shares got to Fullerton's floor man to execute, the price might be still lower. I couldn't tell at what price I had put out my 1,000 shares until I got a report from the clerk. When I surely would have made 3,000 on the same transaction in a bucket shop, I might not make a cent in a stock exchange house. Of course, I have taken an extreme case, but the fact remains that in A.R. Fullerton's office, the tape always talked ancient history to me, as far as my system of trading went, and I didn't realize it. And then, too, if my order was fairly big, my own sale would tend further to depress the price. In the bucket shop, I didn't have to figure on the effect of my own trading. I lost in New York because the game was altogether different. It was not that I was now playing it legitimately that made me lose, but that I was playing it ignorantly. I have been told that I'm a good reader of the tape, but reading the tape like an expert did not save me. I might have made out a great deal better if I had been on the floor myself, a room trader. In a particular crowd, perhaps I might have adapted my system to the conditions immediately before me. But, of course, if I got to operating on such a scale as I do now, for instance, the system would have equally failed me, on account of the effect of my own trading on prices. In short, I did not know the game of stock speculation. I knew a part of it, a rather important part, which has been very valuable to me at all times. But if with all I had I still lost, what chance does the green outsider have of winning, or rather of cashing in? It didn't take me long to realize that there was something wrong with my play, but I couldn't spot the exact trouble. There were times when my system worked beautifully, and then all of a sudden, nothing but one swat after another. I was only 22, remember. Not that I was so stuck on myself that I didn't want to know just where I was at fault, but at that age, nobody knows much of anything. The people in the office were very nice to me. I couldn't plunge as I wanted to because of their margin requirements. But old A.R. Fullerton and the rest of the firm were so kind to me that after 6 months of active trading, I not only lost all I had brought and all that I had made there, but I even owed the firm a few hundreds. There I was, a mere kid, who had never before been away from home, flat broke. But I knew there wasn't anything wrong with me, only with my play. I don't know whether I make myself plain, but I never lose my temper over the stock market. I never argue with the tape. Getting sore at the market doesn't get you anywhere. I was so anxious to resume trading that I didn't lose a minute, but went to old man Fullerton and said to him, "Say, AR, lend me $500. "What for?" says he. "I've got to have some money." "What for?" he says again. "For margin, of course," I said. $500, he said and frowned. You know they'd expect you to keep up a 10% margin, and that means $1,000 on 100 shares. Much better to give you a credit. "No," I said, "I don't want a credit here. I already owe the firm something. What I want is for you to lend me $500 so I can go out and get a roll and come back." "How are you going to do it?" asked old AR. "I'll go and trade in a bucket shop," I told him. "Trade here," he said. "No," I said, "I'm not sure yet I can beat the game in this office, but I am sure I can take money out of the bucket shops. I know that game. I have a notion that I know just where I went wrong here." He let me have it, and I went out of that office where the boy terror of the bucket shops, as they called him, had lost his pile. I couldn't go back home because the shops there would not take my business. New York was out of the question. There weren't any doing business at that time. They tell me that in the Go's Broad Street and New Street were full of them, but there weren't any when I needed them in my business. So after some thinking, I decided to go to St. Louis. I had heard of two concerns there that did an enormous business all through the Middle West. Their profits must have been huge. They had branch offices in dozens of towns. In fact, I had been told that there were no concerns in the East to compare with them for volume of business. They ran openly and the best people traded there without any qualms. A fellow even told me that the owner of one of the concerns was a vice president of the Chamber of Commerce, but that couldn't have been in St. Louis. At any rate, that is where I went with my $500 to bring back a stake to use as margin in the office of A.R. Fullerton and Company, members of the New York Stock Exchange. When I got to St. Louis, I went to the hotel, washed up, and went out to find the bucket shops. One was the J.G. Dolan Company, and the other was H.S. Teller and Company. I knew I could beat them. I was going to play dead, safe, carefully, and conservatively. My one fear was that somebody might recognize me and give me away, because the bucket shops all over the country had heard of the boy trader. They're like gambling houses and get all the gossip of the professionals. Dolan was nearer than Teller, and I went there first. I was hoping I might be allowed to do business a few days before they told me to take my trade somewhere else. I walked in. It was a whopping big place, and there must have been at least a couple of hundred people there staring at the quotations. I was glad, because in such a crowd I stood a better chance of being unnoticed. I stood and watched the board and looked them over carefully until I picked out the stock for my initial play. I looked around and saw the order clerk at the window, where you put down your money and get your ticket. He was looking at me, so I walked up to him and asked, "Is this where you trade in cotton and wheat?" "Yes, Sonny," says he. "Can I buy stocks too?" "You can if you have the cash," he said. "Oh, I got that all right," I said like a boasting boy. "You have you?" he says with a smile. "How much stock can I buy for $100? I asked, peeved like. "100, if you got the 100. "I got the 100, yes, and 200 too," I told him. "Oh my," he said. "Just you buy me 200 shares, I said sharply. 200 what? He asked, serious now. It was business. I looked at the board again, as if to guess wisely, and told him, 200 Omaha. "All right," he said. He took my money, counted it, and wrote out the ticket. "What's your name?" he asked me, and I answered, "Horace Kent." He gave me the ticket, and I went away and sat down among the customers to wait for the roll to grow. I got quick action, and I traded several times that day. On the next day, too. In 2 days, I made $2,800, and I was hoping they'd let me finish the week out. At the rate I was going, that wouldn't be so bad. Then I'd tackle the other shop, and if I had similar luck there, I'd go back to New York with a wad I could do something with. On the morning of the third day, when I went to the window, bashful-like, to buy 500 BRT, the clerk said to me, "Say, Mr. Kent, the boss wants to see you." I knew the game was up, but I asked him, "What does he want to see me about?" "I don't know." "Where is he?" "In his private office. Go in that way." And he pointed to a door. I went in. Dolan was sitting at his desk. He swung around and said, "Sit down, Livingston." He pointed to a chair. My last hope vanished. I don't know how he discovered who I was, perhaps from the hotel register. "What do you want to see me about?" I asked him. "Listen, kid, I ain't got nothing against you, see? Nothing at all, see?" "No, I don't see," I said. He got up from his swivel chair. He was a whopping big guy. He said to me, "Just come over here, Livingston, will you?" And he walked to the door. He opened it, and then he pointed to the customers in the big room. "Do you see 'em?" he asked. "See what?" "Them guys. Take a look at 'em, kid. There's 300 of 'em. 300 suckers. They feed me and my family, see? 300 suckers. Then ye come in, and in 2 days ye cop more than I get out of the 300 in 2 weeks. That ain't business, kid, not for me. I ain't got nothing against you, kid. You're welcome to what you got, but you don't get any more. There ain't any here for you. Why, that's all. I seen you come in the day before yesterday, and I didn't like your looks. On the level, I didn't. I spotted you for a ringer. I called in that jackass there," he pointed to the guilty clerk, "and asked what you done. And when he told me, I said to him, I don't like that guy's looks. He's a ringer. And that piece of cheese says, 'Ringer my eye, boss.' His name is Horace Kent, and he's a rah-rah boy playing at being used to long pants. He's all right. Well, I let him have it his way. That blankety-blank cost me $2,800. I don't grudge it you, my boy, but the safe is locked for you." "Look here," I began. "You look here, Livingston," he said. "I've heard all about ye. I make my money copperin' suckers' bets, and you don't belong here. I aim to be a sport, and you're welcome to what you pride off in us, but more of that would make me a sucker, now that I know who you are. So toddle along, sonny." I left Dolan's place with my $2,800 profit. Teller's place was in the same block. I had found out that Teller was a very rich man who also ran up a lot of pool rooms. I decided to go to his bucket shop. I wondered whether it would be wise to start moderately and work up to 1,000 shares, or to begin with a plunge, on the theory that I might not be able to trade more than 1 day. They get wise mighty quick when they're losing, and I did want to buy 1,000 BRT. I was sure I could take 4 or 5 points out of it. But if they got suspicious, or if too many customers were long on that stock, they might not let me trade at all. I thought perhaps I'd better scatter my trades at first, and begin small. It wasn't as big a place as Dolan's, but the fixtures were nicer, and evidently the crowd was of a better class. This suited me down to the ground, and I decided to buy my 1,000 BRT. So I stepped up to the proper window and said to the clerk, "I'd like to buy some BRT. What's the limit?" "There's no limit," said the clerk. "You can buy all you please if you've got the money." "Buy 1,500 shares, I says, and took my roll from my pocket while the clerk starts to write the ticket. Then I saw a red-headed man just shove that clerk away from the counter. He leaned across and said to me, "Say, Livingston, you go back to Dolan's. We don't want your business." "Wait until I get my ticket," I said. "I just bought a little BRT." "You get no ticket here," he said. By this time, other clerks had got behind him and were looking at me. "Don't ever come here to trade. We don't take your business, understand?" There was no sense in getting mad or trying to argue, so I went back to the hotel, paid my bill, and took the first train back to New York. It was tough. I wanted to take back some real money, and that teller wouldn't let me make even one trade. I got back to New York, paid Fullerton his $500, and started trading again with the St. Louis money. I had good and bad spells, but I was doing better than breaking even. After all, I didn't have much to unlearn, only to grasp the one fact that there was more to the game of stock speculation than I had considered before I went to Fullerton's office to trade. I was like one of those puzzle fans, doing the crossword puzzles in the Sunday supplement. He isn't satisfied until he gets it. Well, I certainly wanted to find the solution to my puzzle. I thought I was done with trading in bucket shops, but I was mistaken. About a couple months after I got back to New York, an old jigger came into the Fullertons' office. He knew AR. Somebody said they'd once owned a string of racehorses together. It was plain he'd seen better days. I was introduced to old McDevitt. He was telling the crowd about a bunch of Western racetrack crooks who had just pulled off some skin game out in St. Louis. The head devil, he said, was a pool room owner by the name of Teller. What Teller? I asked him. Hi, Teller. H.S. Teller. I know that bird, I said. He's no good, said McDevitt. He's worse than that, I said. Man, I have a little matter to settle with him. Meaning how? The only way I can hit any of these short sports is through their pocketbook. I can't touch him in St. Louis just now, but someday I will. And I told McDevitt my grievance. Well, says old Mac, he tried to connect here in New York and couldn't make it. So he's opened a place in Hoboken. The word's gone out that there is no limit to the play, and that the house roll has got the Rock of Gibraltar faded to the shadow of a bantan flea. What sort of a place? I thought he meant pool room. Bucket shop, said McDevitt. Are you sure it's open? Yes, I've seen several fellows who've told me about it. That's only hearsay, I said. Can you find out positively if it's running, and also how heavy they'll really let a man trade? Sure, Sonny, said McDevitt. I'll go myself tomorrow morning and come back here and tell you. He did. It seems Teller was already doing a big business and would take all he could get. This was on a Friday. The market had been going up all that week. This was 20 years ago, remember. And it was a cinch the bank statement on Saturday would show a big decrease in the surplus reserve. That would give the conventional excuse to the big room traders to jump on the market and try to shake out some of the weak commissioned house accounts. There would be the usual reactions in the last half hour of the trading, particularly in stocks in which the public had been the most active. Those, of course, also would be the very stocks that Teller's customers would be most heavily long of, and the shop might be glad to see some short selling in them. There's nothing so nice as catching the suckers both ways, and nothing so easy with 1-point margins. That Saturday morning I chased over to Hoboken to the Teller place. They had fitted up a big customer's room with a dandy quotation board, and a full force of clerks, and a special policeman in gray. There were about 25 customers. I got to talking to the manager. He asked me what he could do for me, and I told him nothing. That a fellow could make much more money at the track on account of the odds, and the freedom to bet your whole roll and stand to win thousands in minutes, instead of picking for chicken feed in stocks, and having to wait days, perhaps. He began to tell me how much safer the stock market game was, and how much some of their customers made. You'd have sworn it was a regular broker who actually bought and sold your stocks on the exchange. And how, if a man only traded heavy, he could make enough to satisfy anybody. He must have thought I was headed for some pool room, and he wanted a whack at my roll before the ponies nibbled it away. For he said I ought to hurry up as the market closed at 12 o'clock on Saturdays. That would leave me free to devote the entire afternoon to other pursuits. I might have a bigger roll to carry to the track with tow if I picked the right stocks. I looked as if I didn't believe him, and he kept on buzzing me. I was watching the clock. At 11:15 I said, all right, and I began to give him selling orders in various stocks. I put up $2,000 in cash, and he was very glad to get it. He told me he thought I'd make a lot of money, and he hoped I'd come in often. It happened just as I figured. The traders hammered the stocks in which they figured they would uncover the most stops, and sure enough, prices slid off. I closed out my trades just before the rally of the last 5 minutes on the usual traders covering. There was $5,100 coming to me. I went to cash in. I'm glad I dropped in, I said to the manager, and gave him my tickets. Say, he says, I can't give you all of it. I wasn't looking for such a run. I'll have it here for you Monday morning, sure as blazes. All right, but first I'll take all you have in the house, I said. You've got to let me pay off the little fellows, he said. I'll give you back what you put up and anything that's left over. Wait till I cash the other tickets. So I waited while he paid off the other winners. Oh, I knew my money was safe. Teller wouldn't welsh with the office doing such a good business. And if he did, what else could I do better than to take all that he had then and there? I got my own $2,000 and about $800 besides, which was all he had in the office. I told him I'd be there Monday morning. He swore the money would be waiting for me. I got to Hoboken a little before 12 on Monday. I saw a fellow talking to the manager that I had seen in the St. Louis office the day Teller told me to go back to Dolan. I knew at once that the manager had telegraphed to the home office, and they'd sent up one of their men to investigate the story. Crooks don't trust anybody. I came for the balance of my money, I said to the manager. Is this the man? Asked the St. Louis chap. Yes, said the manager, and took a bunch of yellowbacks from his pocket. Hold on, said the St. Louis fellow to him, and then turns to me. Say, Livingston, didn't we tell you we didn't want your business? Give me my money first, I said to the manager, and he forked over 2,000s, 4 500s, and 300s. What did you say? I said to St. Louis. We told you we didn't want you to trade in our place. Yes, I said, that's why I came. Well, don't come any more. Keep away, he snarled at me. The private policeman in gray came over, casual-like. St. Louis shook his fist at the manager and yelled, You ought to have known better, you poor boob, than to let this guy get into you. He's Livingston. You had your orders. Listen, you, I said to the St. Louis man. This isn't St. Louis. You can't pull off any trick here like your boss did with Belfast Boy. You keep away from this office. You can't trade here, he yells. If I can't trade here, nobody else is going to, I told him. You can't get away with that sort of stuff here. Well, St. Louis changed his tune at once. Look here, old boy, he said, all fussed up. Do us a favor, be reasonable. You know we can't stand this every day. The old man's going to hit the ceiling when he hears who it was. Have a heart, Livingston. I'll go easy, I promised. Listen to reason, won't you? For the love of Pete, keep away. Give us a chance to get a good start. We're new here, will you? I don't want any of this high and mighty business the next time I come, I said, and left him talking to the manager at the rate of $1 million a minute. I got some money out of them for the way they treated me in St. Louis. There wasn't any sense in my getting hot or trying to close them up. I went back to Fullerton's office and told McDevitt what had happened. Then I told him that if it was agreeable to him, I'd like to have him go to Teller's place and begin trading in 20 or 30 share lots to get them used to him. Then, the moment I saw a good chance to clean up big, I'd telephone him and he could plunge. I gave McDevitt $1,000 and he went to Hoboken and did as I told him. He got to be one of the regulars. Then, one day, when I thought I saw a break impending, I slipped Mac the word, and he sold all they'd let him. I cleared $2,800 that day, after giving Mac his rake off and paying expenses. And I suspect Mac put down a little bet of his own besides. Less than a month after that, Teller closed his Hoboken branch. The police got busy. And anyhow, it didn't pay, though I only traded there twice. We ran into a crazy bull market when stocks didn't react enough to wipe out even the 1-point margins. And of course, all the customers were bulls and winning and pyramiding. No end of bucket shops busted all over the country. Their game has changed. Trading in the old-fashioned bucket shop had some decided advantages over speculating in a reputable broker's office. For one thing, the automatic closing out of your trade when the margin reached the exhaustion point was the best kind of stop-loss order. You couldn't get stung for more than you would put up, and there was no danger of rotten execution of orders, and so on. In New York, the shops never were as liberal with their patrons, as I've heard they were in the West. Here they used to limit the possible profit on certain stocks of the football order to 2 points. Sugar and Tennessee coal and iron were among these. No matter if they moved 10 points in 10 minutes, you could only make 2 on one ticket. They figured that otherwise the customer was getting too big odds. He stood to lose $1 and to make 10. And then there were times when all the shops, including the biggest, refused to take orders on certain stocks. In 1900, on the day before Election Day, when it was a foregone conclusion that McKinley would win, not a shop in the land let its customers buy stocks. The election odds were 3-1 on McKinley. Buying stocks on Monday, you stood to make from 3 to 6 points or more. A man could bet on Brian and buy stocks and make sure money. The bucket shops refused orders that day. If it hadn't been for their refusing to take my business, I never would have stopped trading in them. And then I never would have learned that there was much more to the game of stock speculation than to play for fluctuations of a few points.